From a plate of food to a forever family. Watch till the end to see how one poor waitress changed their lives forever. How a poor waitress gave food to a blind boy would become the act that changed her entire life. Amara never imagined that a single gesture of kindness, done in the middle of an ordinary day, could carry her from the shadows of poverty into a future filled with hope. It began in the quiet corner of the small restaurant where she worked. Her faded uniform clung to her slender frame, her shoes scuffed from years of wear, but her beauty shone despite her hardships. She carried a steaming plate of food, her hands steady even after hours on her feet. At the corner table sat a young boy with cloudy eyes that could not see, his small fingers brushing aimlessly across the wooden surface. He was blind, and beside him sat a man in an expensive suit, his father watching protectively, but with a heaviness in his expression. Amara placed the plate gently before the boy. He reached out, fumbling for the spoon, but his hands trembled with uncertainty. The spoon clattered against the table, his lips pressing into a tight line of frustration. The father moved slightly, ready to help, but paused as Amara crouched down beside the boy. "Here," she whispered, her voice warm and patient. "Let me show you." She guided his hand carefully, wrapping her slender fingers around his and helping him scoop a spoonful of food. Slowly, she directed it toward his lips. The boy hesitated, then tasted it, and in that instant, his face lit up with a shy, proud smile. Amara laughed softly, encouragement shining in her eyes. "See, you can do it," she told him. "You're stronger than you think." For the boy, it was a small triumph. For his father, it was something far greater. He watched silently, struck by the way this young woman treated his son, not with pity, not with impatience, but with dignity and care. It was a kindness he rarely saw, a warmth that no wealth could ever purchase. For Amara, it was simply compassion, one act of humanity among many she gave, even while she herself had so little. But what she didn't know was that this small moment, this single act of helping a blind boy eat with pride, would set her life on a path she could never have imagined. Because from that day forward, nothing would ever be the same. The afternoon light shifted as Amara rose from the boy's side, placing her tray back against her hip and moving on to her other tables. To her, it was just another act of kindness, the kind she gave freely each day without thinking. But to the man in the suit, Darius Okoye, one of the most influential billionaires in the city, it was unforgettable. He sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the waitress as she worked. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her steps graceful despite the exhaustion etched into her movements. Most people who came near his son treated him with awkward pity or impatience, as though blindness made the boy less than whole. But this young woman, with her worn shoes and tired smile, had treated the child as though he was capable, worthy of pride, worthy of respect. Darius had built empires, controlled industries, and shaped the lives of thousands. Yet in that moment, watching his son eat with a confidence that had never been there before, he realized there were things money could not buy. No tutor, no specialist, no caretaker had been able to reach his boy in that way. But this waitress had, with nothing more than patience and kindness. When the meal ended, Darius placed several bills on the table, far more than the cost of the food. He adjusted his son's coat and rose to leave, but as they stepped out into the cool evening air, his mind lingered. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope he couldn't explain. The next day, and the day after that, Darius returned. Sometimes he brought his son, other times he came alone, but always he found a seat where he could watch Amara. She didn't notice at first. She was too busy juggling trays, clearing tables, and managing the chatter of customers. But he noticed everything, the way her smile never faltered, even when rude patrons barked at her. the way she slipped bread, rolls into a paper napkin to carry home at the end of her shift, the way her laughter lit up the room, even if only for a fleeting second. There was something about her that unsettled him, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that tugged at the walls he had built around his heart. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Amara, meanwhile, returned home each night to a cramped one-room apartment. She counted her tips carefully, stretching them to cover rent and her mother's medicine. Life was hard, but she endured it with quiet resilience. She had no idea that a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom in the nation was beginning to take notice of her, not because of her beauty alone, but because of the way she had touched his son's heart. And so, the seeds of change had been planted. What began as one small act of kindness was slowly growing into something far greater. Amara's life, though she could not yet see it, was about to be rewritten by the very man who had watched her that day in silence. The days passed, and with them, the quiet presence of the man in the tailored suits became harder for Amara to overlook. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Customers came and went all the time. Some preferred the same corner table or ordered the same meals. But this man was different. He never demanded attention, never spoke more than was necessary, and yet his presence filled the small restaurant like a shadow that refused to be ignored. Whenever he came with his son, Amara noticed the way his eyes softened. The boy Samuel always greeted her with a bright smile, his unseeing eyes wide with recognition at the sound of her voice. He clutched her hand when she guided him to his seat, and his laughter rang out whenever she joked with him. Amara found herself lingering longer at their table, not because she was required to, but because something in Samuel warmed her heart. She admired his courage, the way he navigated a world he couldn't see, and she felt protective of him in a way she couldn't explain. But it wasn't just Samuel. The father, quiet, watchful, reserved, studied her with an intensity that sometimes made her uneasy. He rarely smiled, yet his silence spoke volumes. On evenings when he came alone, he ordered coffee and sat for long stretches, barely touching his drink, simply observing. His eyes seemed to search for something beyond the surface of who she was, and it unsettled her because no one had ever looked at her that way before. One evening, after the dinner rush had calmed, Amara carried a tray past his table. He was there again, his expensive watch glinting under the low lights, his posture straight and commanding. She tried to walk past without glancing, but his voice stopped her. "You're very kind to my son," he said, his tone low and steady. Amara blinked, surprised. It was the first time he had spoken to her directly, outside of ordering food. She shifted the tray nervously against her hip. "He's a wonderful boy," she replied softly. "He just needs a little patience, and someone to believe in him." For a fleeting moment, something flickered in the man's eyes, something almost vulnerable. Then he nodded once, his expression unreadable. Not many people see him that way. Amara smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Sometimes the world forgets that kindness doesn't cost anything. She walked away before he could respond, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. That night, as she lay on the thin mattress in her dim apartment, Amara couldn't shake the image of him from her mind. She didn't even know his name, yet his presence lingered like a mystery she couldn't unravel. Why did he keep coming back? Why did he watch her, as though she carried answers he couldn't find anywhere else? And though she didn't realize it yet, her life was already intertwining with his in ways neither of them could control. Darius Okoye was a man accustomed to control. In boardrooms, his words dictated the rise and fall of companies. In his world, trust was a rare currency. But trust was exactly what this young waitress had earned without even knowing it. Her kindness to Samuel had stirred something in him that he couldn't name. Yet he needed to know, was it a fleeting act of charity, or was it who she truly was? And so, quietly, he began to test her. It started small. One afternoon, during the lunch rush, he deliberately left his wallet on the table. From his seat outside, he watched as Amara cleared the dishes and noticed it. She paused, glanced around, then hurried to the door, searching for him. She didn't keep it. She didn't even hesitate. With sincerity in her voice, she called after him until he turned back, handing the wallet over with a smile. "You left this behind," she said, slightly out of breath. Darius studied her, his sharp eyes betraying nothing. "Most wouldn't have returned it so quickly." Amara blinked, confused. "It doesn't belong to me. Why would I keep it?" That answer, so simple yet profound, echoed in his mind long after he left. The next week, he arranged for Samuel to accidentally spill a drink across the table, knowing it would create extra work. He expected at least a flicker of irritation, but Amara only laughed gently, crouching to reassure the embarrassed boy while she mopped up the mess. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she whispered to Samuel. "Accidents happen to everyone." Again, Darius noted her reaction. Patience, warmth, compassion that wasn't staged for anyone else's benefit. But perhaps the moment that struck him most deeply came late one evening. The restaurant was nearly empty, the staff tired from a long day. Darius stayed longer than usual, pretending to study the newspaper. From his seat, he saw Amara slip into the kitchen with a small paper bag. Curious, he followed after she left, asking the head cook what she had taken. For weeks, their meetings had been confined to the little restaurant. A world of clinking plates, murmured orders, and steaming bowls of stew. It had become their safe place, the ground where their paths crossed again and again. But Darius knew he couldn't keep it there forever. One evening, as Amara wiped down the tables after the last customers had gone, Darius lingered with Samuel. The boy was doodling shapes on a napkin with a crayon Amara had given him, humming to himself. Darius watched her with thoughtful eyes, then finally spoke. "Amara," he said gently. She looked up, startled. "Yes, sir?" His lips curved into a faint smile. "How many times must I ask you not to call me sir?" "My name is Darius." She flushed, her hand stilling on the rag she held. "Old habits. Hard to break." "Then perhaps," he said slowly, "we should find a way to change those habits, outside of this restaurant." Her brow furrowed. "Outside?" "Yes," Darius replied. "You've cared for Samuel as though he were your own. You've shown him more patience, more kindness than people who are paid to do so. And you've given me something I haven't had in a long time: trust without expectation." His words made her heart race. She tried to steady herself. "What are you saying?" "I'm asking," Darius said, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity, "if you would join us for a walk this Saturday. No uniforms, no trays, no restaurant. Just Amara, Darius, and Samuel." Amara froze. The rags slipped from her hands. She wanted to say yes, desperately, but the doubts came rushing in like a flood. She was a poor waitress in a borrowed dress. He was a billionaire whose name adorned skyscrapers. What would people think if they saw them together? Sensing her hesitation, Darius leaned closer. His voice softened. "I'm not asking you to step into my world, Amara. I'm asking you to let me step into yours, to share something simple, something real." Before she could answer, Samuel chimed in, his little face lighting up. "Please, Amara, I want to go to the park with you. Papa doesn't push me on the swings right. He goes too slow." Her heart melted at the boy's plea. She glanced at Darius, who was watching her with quiet hope. And though every instinct screamed that she should protect her heart, The words slipped out before she could stop them. "All right. Saturday." Samuel clapped his hands with delight. Darius's smile, though restrained, carried a warmth that made her knees weak. That night, as Amara walked home, she felt the world shift beneath her feet. This was no longer just about a waitress and her kind customers. This was something more, something fragile, terrifying, and exhilarating. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering what she had just agreed to. A walk with a billionaire and his son. A simple outing that had the power to unravel the careful walls she had built around her heart. And for the first time in years, Amara dared to dream, though she feared what dreams might cost her. Saturday morning arrived with a golden sun spilling over the horizon, and Amara could hardly believe what she was doing. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in her tiny room, smoothing the wrinkles out of her one decent dress, a soft blue one she had kept neatly folded for years, worn only on Sundays and rare family occasions. She had brushed her hair until it shone, letting it fall in waves past her shoulders, and tied a small ribbon to keep it out of her face. She told herself it was just a walk, just a day in the park with Samuel. That was all. Yet her trembling hands betrayed how much this moment meant. When she arrived at the park, Samuel spotted her first. "Amara!" he shouted, running forward with arms outstretched. She knelt to catch him, laughing as his small arms wrapped around her neck. "You look like a princess," Samuel whispered proudly. Amara smiled, brushing her fingers through his curls. "And you look like the bravest knight I've ever met." Darius approached slowly, his tall frame outlined by the morning light. He was dressed simply dark slacks, a crisp shirt with sleeves rolled up, and yet he carried an air of quiet elegance that made Amara's heart flutter. His eyes lingered on her, not with the superiority of a wealthy man, but with admiration, as if he were seeing her for the very first time. "You came," he said softly. "You asked," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They walked together, Samuel holding Amara's hand in one and Darius's in the other. The boys' laughter filled the air as they reached the swings, and soon Amara was pushing him higher and higher, his squeals of joy echoing across the park. "See, Papa," Samuel called, his feet kicking at the sky. "Amara pushes me better than you." Darius chuckled, shaking his head. "I believe it." As the morning slipped into afternoon, they shared a picnic on a blanket under the shade of a tree. Amara had brought a basket with simple food she had prepared: roasted peanuts, fried plantains, and fresh mango slices. Darius surprised her by tasting everything eagerly, as if it were a feast. "You made all this?" he asked. "Yes," Amara admitted shyly. "It's nothing special." He met her eyes, his tone sincere. "It's more than special. It tastes like home." The words sank deep into her, and she found herself smiling in spite of her fears. For hours they talked about small things, about Samuel's favourite games, about the little joys that filled her days. Darius listened intently, as though her words were worth more than gold. As the sun began to set, Samuel grew sleepy, curling against his father's chest. Amara watched as Darius lifted him gently, the billionaire transformed into just a man carrying his son. "Thank you," Darius said quietly. "For today, for him, for me." Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him that she was grateful too, that this day had given her something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. But the words tangled in her throat. As they parted, Samuel sleepily murmured, "Next time, Amara, come home with us." Amara's heart stumbled at the innocent request. Darius's eyes met hers, and though he said nothing, she saw the unspoken question there. She walked home that night in silence, clutching the memory of laughter, warmth, and the dangerous spark of a bond that was growing far too strong to ignore. The following week, Amara found herself standing in front of towering black iron gates that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. She clutched her small handbag nervously, wondering for the 100th time why she had agreed to come. Samuel's words still echoed in her heart. "Next time, Amara, come home with us." How could she say no to the boy who had stolen her heart with his laughter and innocence? A guard at the gate pressed a button, and with a low hum, the gates swung open. Amara stepped inside, her simple sandals crunching on the gravel path that wound through lush gardens filled with vibrant flowers and trimmed hedges. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and a fountain gurgled in the centre of a marble courtyard. Her breath caught. She had never seen such beauty. The mansion rose ahead like something out of a dream. Wide balconies, tall windows glittering in the sun, walls painted in soft cream with intricate carvings along the edges. Every step she took made her painfully aware of her patched dress and worn shoes. But then a familiar voice called out, "Amara!" Samuel came running down the steps, guided by the memory of the path, his cane tapping lightly against the stone. He reached her and hugged her so tightly that she nearly forgot her nerves. His smile erased the grandeur of the mansion, reminding her that this was why she had come. Darius followed behind at a calmer pace. He looked different here, not the quiet father she had seen in the cafe or at the park, but a man who truly belonged to this world of power and luxury. Yet when his gaze met hers, it softened. "Welcome," he said simply. Inside, Amara marvelled at polished floors that gleamed like mirrors, chandeliers that sparkled with crystal light, and walls lined with art worth more than she could ever imagine earning in a lifetime. Servants moved quietly, bowing to Darius, but their eyes lingered on her with curiosity. Amara felt her cheeks burn. She didn't belong here. She was a waitress, a nobody. But then Samuel grabbed her hand and tugged. "Come on, I want to show you my music room." The boy led her through hallways until they reached a room filled with instruments, pianos, violins, drums, even guitars. He guided her to a small stool by the piano and asked her to sit. Then, placing his hands on the keys, he began to play. Amara gasped. The melody was soft, yet powerful, filled with emotion. Though Samuel could not see, his fingers danced across the piano as though he had been born for it. Darius entered quietly, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but there was pride in his eyes. When the song ended, Amara clapped with genuine admiration. "Samuel, that was beautiful. You play with your heart." Samuel grinned. "Papa says music is how I see the world." Amara's eyes flicked to Darius, who nodded in agreement. Something unspoken passed between them. Respect, admiration, and the fragile beginning of trust. Later, as Samuel grew tired, Darius walked Amara to the door. The evening air was cool, and the garden lights glowed softly around them. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know it wasn't easy." Amara lowered her gaze. "I don't belong here, Darius. This is another world." He paused, then spoke with quiet conviction. "Maybe. But sometimes the most important people in our lives don't come from the same world. Sometimes they enter it to remind us what truly matters." Her heart raced at his words, but she said nothing. Instead, she walked out of the gates, her mind spinning. For the first time, Amara began to wonder if Samuel's... It began on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Amara had just arrived at the mansion, greeted by Samuel's familiar laughter echoing down the halls. But when he ran toward her, she noticed something different. His usual bright step seemed slower, his cheeks flushed, and there was a faint heaviness in his voice. "Amara, you came," he said, holding her hand. But as he tugged her toward the music room, his small fingers felt warmer than usual, too warm. Amara frowned and bent down, touching his forehead. Her heart skipped. "Samuel, you're burning up." Almost immediately, she guided him to a chair. her hands trembling slightly. "Has he been feeling unwell?" she asked the maid nearby. The maid shrugged uneasily. "The boy said nothing. He never complains." Amara's worry deepened. She knelt by Samuel's side, brushing his curls back gently. "Why didn't you tell anyone, Samuel?" He offered her a weak smile. "I didn't want Papa to worry. He already worries too much." Her chest ached at his words. She knew what it meant for a child to hold in pain just to protect someone else. Moments later, Darius appeared, alerted by the commotion. His eyes widened when he saw Samuel pale and listless. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice tight with fear. Amara spoke quickly but gently. "He has a fever, Darius. It came suddenly, but it's high. He needs rest and care right away." Without hesitation, Darius lifted his son into his arms, his composure cracking for the first time. "Call the doctor, now," he ordered the staff. The household leapt into motion, but through it all, Samuel clung to Amara's hand, refusing to let go, even as Darius carried him upstairs. His trust was clear. She was his comfort, his anchor. Hours passed with the doctor at Samuel's bedside. Amara stayed close, holding cool cloths to his forehead, murmuring soft words to soothe him. Darius paced restlessly, his usual calm replaced by sharp breaths and restless movements. Every so often his eyes fell on Amara, watching how she stayed steady, how her presence calmed the boy. Finally, the doctor emerged with reassuring news. "It's an infection, nothing severe. He'll recover with proper rest and medicine." Relief washed over Darius like a tidal wave, but Amara's hand never left Samuel's. When the doctor left, the room quieted. Samuel slept peacefully at last, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Amara sat at his bedside, her fingers still curled protectively around his. "You didn't have to stay," Darius said softly from across the room. His voice, stripped of its usual authority, sounded almost vulnerable. Amara looked up, her expression firm yet tender. "I did. He needed me, and truthfully, I couldn't have left even if I tried." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Darius stepped closer, his gaze lingering on his son and then on her. "You care for him as though he were your own." Amara swallowed, her heart pounding. "He feels like my own sometimes." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she quickly lowered her gaze, cheeks warming. But Darius didn't look offended. Instead, there was a softness in his expression that she hadn't seen before, a recognition, perhaps even gratitude. As night settled in, Amara stayed by Samuel's side, singing quietly until the boy drifted deeper into healing sleep. Darius remained nearby, watching silently. And though neither said it aloud, something had shifted between them. In Samuel's moment of weakness, Amara had proven her strength, not just to the boy, but to his father. And in that quiet night, with shadows falling gently across the room, Darius began to realize that Amara's place in their lives was no longer temporary. The night after Samuel's fever broke, the mansion was unusually quiet. The boy slept peacefully upstairs, and for once Darius was not buried in business calls or meetings. Instead, he found himself lingering outside Samuel's room, watching as Amara gently tucked the covers around the child before slipping out into the hallway. She closed the door softly, turning and nearly startled when she saw Darius waiting there. "Oh," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "I didn't see you." His lips curved into a faint smile. "You move quietly. It's a gift." For a moment, they stood in the dim hallway, the only sound the faint hum of the night air outside. Then, in a voice lower than usual, Darius said, "Would you join me for some tea, just for a while?" Amara hesitated. A part of her felt out of place in this grand house, unsure if she belonged in moments beyond Samuel. But the look in Darius's eyes, unguarded, weary, softened her doubts. She nodded. They made their way to the study, where the glow of a single lamp lit the room in warm amber. Darius poured tea for them both, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Amara watched him quietly, noting how his hands, though strong, trembled just slightly when he set the teapot down. For a long while they sipped in silence. Then Darius exhaled, his voice breaking the stillness. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." "An explanation?" Amara asked gently. He looked down into his cup, his expression shadowed. "Why I am the way I am. Why I hold Samuel so close. And yet, for years, I have kept everyone else at a distance." Amara listened, her heart bracing for truths she sensed had weighed on him for years. "My wife Lydia, she was my world," Darius began, his voice quiet but steady. "She had Samuel's laughter, his gentleness. When Samuel was only 2, we lost her. A sudden illness. One day she was here, singing to him, the next, she was gone." The ache in his tone wrapped around Amara's chest like a vice. She could almost see it, the hollow left behind, the emptiness that money or success could never fill. Darius's eyes, usually guarded, shone with unspoken grief. "I promised her I would protect Samuel, give him everything, but sometimes I fear I have only given him walls. I built them to keep the world out, but perhaps I trapped him inside with me." Amara set her cup down carefully, her voice soft but steady. "You've given him love, Darius. I see it every time he reaches for your hand. But Samuel needs more than protection. He needs freedom, laughter, connection. He needs people who see him the way you see him." For a long moment, Darius studied her, as if weighing every word. Then his voice lowered. "And you see him, truly, not as a blind boy, not as an heir to wealth, just Samuel." Amara's cheeks warmed, but her gaze didn't waver. "Because he is Samuel, nothing more, nothing less." Silence stretched again, but this time it was not heavy. It was gentle, almost fragile. Darius leaned back in his chair, the lines on his face easing. "It has been a long time since I spoke of Lydia. Thank you for listening." Amara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for trusting me." And in that quiet study, amid the shadows of memory, a new bond began to form, not built on wealth or obligation, but on shared vulnerability. For the first time in years, Darius felt something stir inside him that had long been buried, a sense of hope, fragile but real. And as Amara rose to leave, he found himself thinking not just of his son's future, but of his own. The following week felt different inside the mansion. Samuel's laughter carried through the halls with renewed strength, each note of joy as though life itself had returned to him. And wherever Samuel was, Amara seemed never far away her presence, no longer just that of a visitor, but of someone who had become part of the rhythm of their lives. Darius watched this transformation closely. He saw how Samuel lit up when Amara entered the room, how her patience drew out the boy's courage, how her kindness mended more than his blindness. It mended the spaces left by loss. And Darius, once the man who measured everything by profit and gain, found himself measuring each day by the light she brought into their home. But the mansion was still full of whispers. Some staff spoke kindly of Amara now, seeing her devotion. Others clung to suspicion, convinced her presence was temporary or worse, opportunistic. Miriam, the housekeeper, in particular, remained cold. Darius heard it all, but unlike before, he didn't stay silent. One evening, as Samuel practiced piano in the parlour, Darius called the household together. Amara, confused, stood at the edge of the gathering, while the staff waited, exchanging uncertain glances. "I've built this house on trust," Darius began, his voice carrying with quiet authority. "But trust is not only given, it must be earned. Over these months, one person here has shown not just loyalty, but honesty, courage, and love. That person is Amara." Murmurs rippled through the room. Amara's eyes widened, her hands trembling at her sides. Darius stepped forward, his gaze steady on her. "When I first saw you feeding my son, I thought it was a simple act of kindness. But it was more than that. You gave him dignity. You gave him hope. And through him, you gave me something I thought I had lost forever." The room stilled. Even Miriam's sharp eyes softened. "From this day forward," Darius continued, his voice firm, "Amara will no longer be treated as an outsider. She is part of this family, and I intend to make sure she never has to live in fear of hunger or struggle again." Samuel's hands clapped together in delight, his voice bursting with joy. "Does that mean she'll stay forever, Father?" Darius turned to Amara, his expression gentler than she had ever seen. "If she wishes to." Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. For so long she had lived in shadows of hardship, believing her worth was tied to the wages she earned or the tables she served. Yet here, in this moment, she was seen for who she truly was, for her heart, her sacrifice, her love. She knelt beside Samuel, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Yes, Samuel, if you'll have me, I'll stay." The